Good morning. Good morning. I'm Virginia McNeely. I'm the deacon at All Saints in Sacramento, which is across from City College. I am also the mentor of the EFM group, Education for Ministry group, which meets here. It's the deanery group, and we meet on Monday afternoons, and we'll be starting again this September. Now, Reverend Joe asked me to include EFM in my homily along with the readings. So I'm not going to be able to talk about Jezebel, who's one of my favorite villains. I'm not going to be able to talk about Elijah, who is one of my very favorite prophets, because he really goes face to face with God. And I won't be sharing with you the history and significance of all of the readings this morning. We're only going to be using the gospel reading. Is it possible to put it back up on the screen? No? Well, then you're going to have to remember what I said. It's coming back. Okay, move on. Okay. Would you like me to read it to you? You have it? Okay. You have it. You understand. Okay. You can be seated. Oh, please. Sorry, I forgot about that. Okay, a regular Education for Ministry meeting takes 2.5 hours. The first half of the meeting includes prayer, check-in, where we focus on the group, and a discussion of our readings in the group. And the group meets here at St. Francis. This year, we had members who read about the Old Testament, which is the Year 1 readings, the New Testament, which is the Year 2 readings, and theology, which is Year 4 readings. This fall, the two people who were in the Year 2 group will be in Year 3, and they'll learn about the history of Christianity in the church. Now, I know you don't want to sit through a 2.5-hour meeting. I mean, we are not Baptists. We are Episcopalians. So we're going to have a shorter homily or sermon. And I'm going to describe the second half of the weekly EFM meeting for you. This is a theological reflection, or a TR, which is a method that is developed by Sewanee, University of the South, which has this program for us. So we're going to look at it to see how God is working in our world and in our lives today. It's a theological reflection that makes EFM something more than a Bible study or a book group. Theological reflection helps us to develop our relationship with God and the world. Now, EFM has a number of methods to use in theological reflection. A personal experience, something that's happened to me or somebody else in the group, a belief, an object. We could do it on just about anything. We could do it on a camera if we wanted to. An issue, something that's creating confusion or making us make decisions about things. Or even a provocative word. We could do it on one word. But for our purpose today, we're going to use the method that we use with Scripture, starting with tradition. And we're going to use the reading from the Gospel, Luke 7, verses 36 through 8.83, and we heard that today. Now, I'm going to ask you to be much more responsive than you ordinarily are. I know we as Episcopalians are used to sitting in our pews and maybe taking some notes, but we listen, but we don't often respond the way they do in some other churches. But I'm going to ask you to respond as well as you are able to. And I expect our EFM folks to really respond. In starting with Scripture, we usually read aloud several versions of what we're using from different Bibles, because translations differ and can change how we understand the passage. Now, in this story in Luke, I see two themes. You may see others. Not everyone appreciates or accepts the ministry of Jesus, and Jesus may value someone of lower status over someone of high status because of how that person acts. Do you see any other themes in what we've what we heard this morning? No, okay. Forgiveness. Okay, another theme. Judgment. Another theme.
Forgiveness of sins.
Forgiveness of sins. Thank you, Laura. Anything else? Hospitality. Compassion. Prayer. Blessing. Worship. Okay, what do we know about the meaning of this text or its original setting? What's happening in this story and what's going on? How have others interpreted this text? What kind of a text is it? What might it mean today? For instance, this is a dinner party. We have dinner parties today, but this is a very different kind of dinner party. These are just men. Women did not sit with the men for a meal, okay? And they didn't sit on chairs at a table the way we do. They're on the floor on pillows with a very low table, very different kind of setting. And these are probably all Pharisees or friends of the Pharisee who was hosting it, besides Jesus and maybe some of his friends. Women were not allowed to sit with the men. Women prepared the meal, had it brought in, but they were somewhere else. What else do you know about this kind of a setting?
The Pharisee, it was very hierarchical, and the Pharisees were the clergy that were in charge of things and set the rules.
Did everybody hear that? Okay. Anything else? Sexism, I heard that whispered from back there. Yes, sexism. Women were treated very differently. And in that society, women had no power at all. If you didn't have a husband or a brother or a son to protect you, you were toast. You had no life at all. And for all we know, this woman who was said to be sinful, and we don't know why. And why did all of these men know that she was sinful? How was she making a living? We don't know that. But maybe she was someone who didn't have any support, didn't have a husband. Maybe she was a widow. Maybe she had lost a son, as many of the women in the Old Testament seem to do. Okay. What could this text mean today? How are we different? Not much. Whoa. Okay. Well, as women, we get to sit with the men, though, at dinner, right? We get to do that. We allow them to sit with us. Oh, thank you. That's beautiful. Okay. Sometimes they even clear the table if we're lucky,
Wasn't it customary to offer a guest water for the feet? To not do so, would that be a kind of a slight?
Ah, very good. Did everybody hear that? Wasn't it customary to offer a visitor water to wash their feet? Wasn't this, how did you put it, a
slight.
A slight.
Kind of a slight,
Mm-hmm.
So they were dubious about Jesus. They were kind of checking him out as a prophet.
Right. Yeah, they were dubious about Jesus. They were checking him out as a prophet. These were not all believers who were there in the house. We could even get into a discussion about whether the woman had already been forgiven. When you read the passage over, had she already been forgiven and was thanking Jesus for the forgiveness? Or was she forgiven because of her love and what she did for Jesus? So that's another discussion group that we could have if we were in a group. This might even be even more evident if we were reading a different translation of the Bible, or if we interpret what we read differently. Okay, we've talked about tradition. And what was the world like in this passage? Now, we're talking about a time when the Israelites were under the thumb of the Romans. What else do we know about that time and what it was like?
It was a very closed system.
It was a very closed system. Half the people were slaves. I don't know if you know that, but half of the people were slaves in the Roman Empire. Women had no rights, couldn't own property. They were under the dominance of the Roman Empire. Anything else you know?
They had no means of income. If their husbands and sons were deceased or gone, her only recourse probably would have been to have been a prostitute, if in fact that's what she was.
If that's what she was. Did everybody hear that? Women had no means of support if they didn't have a man to support them. And about all they could do is probably become a prostitute or beg or try to do small jobs for people, maybe do laundry or something like that. What human predicament in the world is revealed in this passage? Is there a human predicament? Dependent? Okay. You have to be dependent on somebody else. That's a human predicament. To be a guest and not be treated the way you expect to be treated, that's a predicament. To be a host and not be sure of the guest that you've invited and not agreeing with what he does, that's a human predicament.
That the power lies with a few and not with the whole.
Power lies with a few and not with everybody. I mean, people couldn't vote.
And only God can forgive sins.
And only God could forgive sins. So you're in a predicament, you're there, and it's Jesus, and you think he's just a prophet. How could he forgive sins? You know, what's going on? What indicates a change of mind, heart, or behavior? What does Jesus tell the host?
Tells him a parable.
Tells him a parable. Did you get that from the reading? Tells him a parable. Talks about the debtors. And if you were a debtor and you owed money and you owed more than other people and you were forgiven, would you love the person who forgave you more? He's making the comparison with what has happened with this woman. Do you think this would have changed the behavior of Simon the Pharisee? No. Didn't recognize it? You don't think he'd change? Well, I would hope he would another time, but in this passage he doesn't. That's for sure.
And he actually had the greater sin. He was judgmental. He was unhospitable.
He had the greater sin, says Mary. He was judgmental and inhospitable. He was not being a host the way you're supposed to be in that part of the world, where anybody who comes, you're supposed to give them the opportunity to wash their feet and their hands. They've been walking those dirty, dusty streets for a long time. They're tired, they're hot. You help them to wash, you give them something to drink, you give them a comfortable place to sit, you prepare a meal for them the way Abraham did. Well, they do have the meal, but Jesus wasn't treated the way that you would ordinarily treat a visitor. What gives rise to celebration in this world? Jesus defends the woman is forgiven, and the host is called to task.
What's interesting too is that the passage ends with all those other women that were following Jesus. And for me, my heart soared at that portion where you know, it was such an affirmation of women's roles in Jesus' life at that point. You know, that was celebration.
Thank you. Did everybody hear that? Laura said she loved the end of the passage where they talked about all these other women who were following Jesus. There was Susanna, there was Anna, Mary Magdalene, who else? Joanna. We don't hear too much about the women who followed Jesus and the disciples. But who prepared their meals? Who took care of their clothing? You know, who made sure they were comfortable? There's no mention in the Bible of Peter doing that or Andrew doing that or one of them. It was the women who were the followers.
And whenever Jesus encounters them, however, they're treated equitably. That's what's always striking, is that they're never treated differently, or they're treated equitably, or even better than the men in the stories.
Okay, Laura said, and the women in the Bible are in the New Testament are always treated equitably by Jesus.
Not others, but by Jesus.
Not by others, but by Jesus. And sometimes even better than the men are treated. Okay. Now, the next step we would do is we'd make connections to our own experience. Now, that's hard to do in this kind of a group. When you're in a small group of 6 people or 8 people, it's not so difficult. So I'm going to ask you just to think about this. And you can talk about this at coffee hour if you want to, or with a friend or a spouse, or if you journal, write it in your journal. With whom do you identify in this passage? And can you recall a time in your life when you experienced an event or situation similar to the one in the passage? And what were your thoughts and feelings? Now, as an example, I'll give you one out of my own life that happened about a week ago. I'm the secretary to the board of the School for Deacons, and I was at home writing up the minutes of the last meeting. And at 6:30, I got a call from a friend of mine, and she said, "Virginia, where are you?" I said, "Well, I'm home doing these minutes." And she said, "But you're supposed to be at my house for dinner, and we're about to sit down, and you haven't arrived yet." And I said, "Okay, I'll be there in 10 minutes. So I just put everything down, didn't change, just went the way I was, and went to this friend's house. And I felt very embarrassed because I was so late. I didn't know the other people except for the hostess and her boyfriend. And their conversation had been going on for a couple of hours, and I was just coming in then. So I know what it's like to feel sort of out of place in a dinner party. And I think Jesus might have felt a little out of place at that dinner party too, at the way he was treated. But think in your own mind, have there been times like that when you felt like you weren't really welcome, or you weren't really accepted for who you were, or you were in a situation where somebody else was in that situation and you saw them, and what did you do about it? Did you speak up? Did you do something about it? So think about how your event or situation relates back to the passage. And in what way does this tradition that we've been talking about support, inform, or challenge your experience? You can see that we've moved into our own thoughts and feelings, which is something we do in a theological reflection. In EFM, we respect everyone's view, and we don't question or criticize anything anyone has said. For that matter, if you're in the group, you can pass and keep all of your thoughts to yourself. Now we look at our own culture. What would our culture say about this passage, and do we see similarities or differences? Okay, then we'll just pass it. From there, we would be ready to share, if we wished, what our position is. Where do we stand? What do we believe? Does this bring anything out of us? If we have insights, we would share them. What have we learned about ourselves as a result of this reflection? Are there any implications for action? Is there anything we would do or intend to do differently as we live out our ministry? EFM's whole purpose is to develop lay people, to develop their ministries, to develop their relationship to Jesus Christ and the church, and to feel that they can make a difference in the world. Is there any help that we can give you as a group to help you to carry out your intentions? By the end of the theological reflection, our time is just about up. We'd pray and then we'd leave, knowing that what we shared in the group was precious. It is not to be shared outside of the group. So everything is kept confidential in the group, so people can feel really open about their beliefs and what they want to do. EFM's purpose is to develop lay people and raise up leaders. The combination of small group work, study, theological reflection, and prayer changes our lives. I invite you to talk with members of your congregation who have graduated from the 4-year program. Dale Barngrover, Mary Musell, and Donna Schimpfke. Ask them how their lives have changed because of the EFM experience. Or you could talk with Laura Simpkins or Judith Richardson, and if you go to another church, you can talk to our friend Betty about what they are getting out of EFM. We would all be happy to share our insights with you. Does anybody have any questions that you want to bring up right now? Any burning questions? Okay, you can get examples of the books assigned for the years at the EFM website, which is efm.sewanee.edu. And after the service, I'll be here and I'll be glad to talk with you about any questions you might have and talk with you about our EFM group. And there are EFM groups in other places, so if you're not available on Monday afternoons, St. Michael's Carmichael has a group, Trinity Cathedral has a group. There are other groups that you could join. There's also an online group if you have kind of an interesting schedule. So there's a way of getting into the program. Well, thank you for listening. I love EFM, and I hope you will consider joining us or learning more about EFM. Thank you.